All right, ladies and gentlemen, get ready for a captivating episode that explores the intersection of law and entrepreneurship with a dedicated advocate for startups and small businesses. Stay tuned. Let's get this one started. Here we go.
Shut up and sit down.
Look, a business can give you everything you want in life: prestige, wealth, freedom. It can also take everything away from you. This show is for those who are willing to take that risk. These are the real life stories of entrepreneurs. But before we start, I have one small favor to ask. Please leave a comment. It can be advice, critiques, tips, feedback, or share this with someone because your engagement is the most valuable and most powerful form of social currency. So thank you, and welcome to another episode of Business Bros. Business Bros. Today we have a very special guest who's not only a skilled attorney, but is also a champion for startups and small businesses. He's a native Detroiter, joins us to share his wealth of knowledge in the world of law and entrepreneurship. So in this episode, we're going to dive deep into his legal landscape for startups and small businesses. His journey from the corporate law to community service is a fascinating one, and we'll explore how he's helping entrepreneurs navigate often complex world of business law. So get ready for a conversation that combines legal expertise with passion for fostering business success. Let's welcome to the show, Mr. Eric Williams. Williams, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I love the intro. Love the intro, man. I feel like I ought to be in the ring somewhere, you know. Let's get ready to rumble.
Let's get ready to rumble. That's what we're doing, man. We're having a conversation about small business. I don't know. It excites me. My background's in accounting, just so you know. So if accounting gets me all happy, I mean, I guess business can do a little bit better than that.
Yeah, I guess it would have to, really.
All right, let's start off with the first question. Obviously, everybody who comes on the show has a business of their own. There's something that they're promoting, something that they do for a living. What is that for you? What is it that you do for a living?
So I'm an attorney. I work with small businesses. I particularly work and focus on intellectual property, which in many instances is the most valuable thing that a startup has. So I would do a lot of that. So I guess the service I'm selling is me. My legal services. I do a lot of public speaking and the like and consulting. So that's kind of what I'm selling, you know?
I feel like all business owners have a specific demographic that they're going after, some sort of niche specifically, because IP could be a lot of different things. I mean, there's intellectual property in books and audios and movies, all kinds of different places that you can go, patents, all kinds of stuff, right? So what is it who's your target demographic? Who's the people that you're specifically going after?
Well, I primarily work with businesses that are, 50 employees and less. Usually they're either fairly recent startups with the last 6 months, or, they're still working on funding and getting up and running, or they've been in business typically 3 to 5 years. So that's kind of who I'm working with, because those are the people who, if they're going to make mistakes, right, at that juncture, they're not so bad, and I can help them fix them, and I can help them put in the infrastructure so those mistakes don't haunt them years down the road. So that's kind of who I'm going after.
And we're definitely going to make mistakes. I don't think not making a mistake is an option when you're a human being, much less when you go into an entrepreneurship. Most of these entrepreneurs, myself included, we don't know what we don't know, right? We're getting into this space thinking that this is exactly what I want to do. I'm going to be the most successful XYZ entrepreneur out there. I'm going to go full force. And then I hit my first road bump. And oftentimes what happens, especially when you talk legal, the road bumps you didn't even see coming, and they come and they could devastate a company. Let me ask you, how did you decide to go into this side of the law particularly? You could have gone into pretty much anything as far as law is concerned. Why small business? Why become an entrepreneur in the entrepreneurial space?
Right. And that's really a fact. I am an entrepreneur myself, right? I own a small business. But I didn't start out this way. I worked in the nonprofit sector before I went to law school. Law is actually a second career for me. So went off, got married, had kids, was working in the nonprofit sector, then went to law school. And I actually wanted to be a public defender. But I went to law school in New York. The Kings County Public Defender's Office actually had a hiring freeze. So I was forced to take a job at it's a luxury at a big firm. where I was making a lot of money and my life was a living hell.
Mm.
I didn't care about the clients that I was, assigned to. A lot of them were the kind of, they're big corporate clients, and a lot of whom were doing things I didn't, like big tobacco and, companies making, that had made like Agent Orange and that kind of thing. So, I wasn't thrilled with that. And so then I went and worked for a smaller firm. I didn't enjoy that either. And so I was kind of wondering, what am I going to do? Uh, because I like practicing law. And then two things sort of happened. One, I had some friends. I have a lot of friends who are who are entertainers, right? Or in the, they're actors or singers or whatever. My sister is, in fact, actually in on Broadway. She's actually in the
Mm.
musical Chicago at the moment. And so, her friends were coming to me, and I had one that was a nonprofit coming to me, and they had a lot of it was a collective of artists, and so they were asking questions, and so I really got into learning about intellectual property and working with nonprofits, and I found I enjoyed it. Then I had the opportunity to come back to Detroit because I was practicing in New York at the time and teach a class at Wayne State University Law School, which is located in downtown Detroit. And the class, it was actually a clinic I taught where we had students, second and third year law students, working with real entrepreneurs in the city of Detroit. And I loved it. It was not only an opportunity to teach people about, the law, but how to work with clients, how to work with clients who had very different backgrounds than your own in many instances. Detroit's a predominantly Black city. Our law school is not predominantly Black. The law school was not predominantly Black. So it was an opportunity to help people get to recognize what actually entrepreneurs starting in the city of Detroit were facing. And so you not only got to help the students, you got to help the entrepreneurs. And I can still drive around Detroit and see, a business here, a business there, a dozen businesses on this side of the city that my students helped get up and running, and they're still thriving. And it was great, and it's something I've just remained engaged in over the years, even after I stopped teaching.
It's crazy. I literally have just finished watching Suits, which is a show about attorneys in New York, corporate attorneys.
Mhm.
And I feel like, excuse me, excuse me. I feel like what you described, they were making a ton of money, but then they felt like it was eating away at their soul every time they were working on some of these cases. They ended up, spoiler alert, they ended up leaving and working for more nonprofit type situations. And I feel like that's
Right.
kind of your story. It's very similar to that. Like you could have gone and stayed with the money. You were living a pretty decent life out of, where you came from initially, but you went back and you're literally living a life more that feeds your soul rather than eats at your soul. Now you're in the position where you're teaching young entrepreneurs, you're giving people opportunities to change their lives. What's the most common piece of advice you give to young entrepreneurs today that you could share with us to help them kind of either spark that interest, give them that motivation to move forward, or give them that little piece of advice that might protect them as they get started in this space?
So being an entrepreneur gives you a lot of freedom in some respects. I mean, people jokingly say as an entrepreneur, you can pick any 24 hours of the day that you want to work. Um, and that's pretty much what it comes down to. I think the most important thing to remember is, and so as a lawyer, this is the thing you need to do. Make decisions now and put them on paper before there's money involved, right?
Mm.
That's just really basic. You have people who have all sorts of agreements, and it's all wonderful when one person is putting in, 75% of the effort, the other person is doing 25%, but they say, yeah, we'll split it 50-50. And I mean, that's fine when you're not making any money, but then later on, you're making money. And suddenly the person who's putting in the 75% doesn't feel quite so warm and fuzzy about that whole 50-50 split, right? So you need to be realistic about what you expect out of it, whether it's money or recognition or whatever. And you should make sure that you have instruments in place, contracts or whatever, to make sure that actually happens. The other thing to keep in mind is that the whole constant grind 24/7, 365 thing is unsustainable long term, right? I
Mm-hmm.
know, I mean, short term it's going to be necessary, and everybody who's operated a business has been there where, hey, I'm not sleeping tonight because this is due. And I've been in that position myself, right? I have multiple clients. I'm like, where's the Red Bull? Because tonight I'm not sleeping. That is unsustainable. And if your business model depends on you doing that, year after year, you have to recognize that you're not going to be able to do it. So one of the things you have to learn to do early on, and it's difficult when it's your business, is learn to delegate. And I think those are some of the most important things. If you're going to have a real viable business, dreams are important. You have to have them, but you also have to, it's the whole adulting thing, as my kids like to complain about, where you just have to do the things you have to do. And sometimes it doesn't, you're like, my dream didn't include taxes. No, it didn't, but your reality does.
Yeah, and I like how you put that too about the working 24/7 and the hustle and the grind, because you do need that. You're right, but it isn't sustainable. And you hear the statistic all the time: 9 out of 10 businesses fail within their first year, and of the ones that succeed, 9 out of 10 of those fail in the next 4 or 5 years. And the reason usually for that, which people don't realize, it's not that the entrepreneur was incapable of delivering the product or service; it's they burn out. They're just
Right.
done with, I don't want to deal with this anymore. You end up like me with no hair for some reason. You're stressed out all the time and you're just, I want out. You realize how quickly you can shift back to being an employee where you can clock in and clock out and be done than it
Right.
is, working on this thing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But you're right. Delegating has to be one of those pieces. I was going to ask you because I like to show Shark Tank in my classroom to kind of talk about entrepreneurship, different ideas that happen. But one of the things that I always am worried about is giving away equity too early in a business. What's your opinion on maintaining equity or looking for funding opportunities when you have a good intellectual piece of property or a patent or something like that that has value, but you do need help kind of getting the project off the ground?
Right. So that's a really good point, and that's something that I think a lot of founders don't think about. They anticipate, I'm going to go public. There's going to be this IPO, and I own 80%. No, let me show you how the waterfall works. The problem is that people either they're too hesitant to give up equity, or they're too generous in giving up equity. You have
Mm.
problems at both ends of the spectrum. Um, So the thing I always suggest people, I always tell people is, it is okay to own a smaller piece of the pie if the pie gets bigger. If it's not making the pie get bigger, then that piece you're giving away better be the difference between between a pie or no pie at all, right? You shouldn't just be giving away equity when you can't, because, for example, you don't feel comfortable taking out a small business loan, right? Um, there are other options. Now, how you approach that really depends on where you are, right? Um, the truth is, 95% of small businesses aren't going to experience the kind of exponential growth that sort of angel investors or venture capitalists are looking for, right? And in fact, I'd say, 85% of entrepreneurs aren't looking for that. They want to have a job, they want to have a job that they love where they're working for themselves and they can, pass it on down to their kids if their kids want to do it. They're not looking to be the next Facebook. Now, clearly, there are lots of people out there doing it, but the vast majority of those people are obviously going to fail. But the mom and pop sort of, businesses make up a large percentage of entrepreneurs. And for them, financing is usually a matter of drawing equity out of your home, borrowing friends and family. A lot of it depends on, as I said, on where you are and what the entrepreneurial ecosystem is like. So, for example, in Detroit, there's a very strong initiative from the government and its corporate and even some philanthropic money to support small businesses, particularly Detroit-owned small businesses, right? So there's a program here called Motor City Match, where they, connect people who have vacant buildings and people who are looking for brick and mortar shops and put them together, and the city will help subsidize, you know, white boxing the buildings. There are all sorts of, competitions and entrepreneurship training programs. So so it really depends on what the ecosystem is like where you are. In Detroit, we actually have probably more, sort of investment money out there than we have good ideas to take advantage of it. Now, it's not the same in every other place, but Detroit is a tough market, so that's kind of why you see that there. I always tell people don't run to give away equity in your company, but if it's going to make the pie bigger, or if it's that missing link, then yes, give it away. But make make no mistake, you will see that down the road. The difference between owning 90% of a company and owning 12%, which is much more likely where you're going to be if you're experiencing that kind of exponential growth we're talking about.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, you definitely want to talk to the attorney when you get ready to do some equity splits like that, because then you start getting into diluted shares and different types of stock
Yeah.
ownership, and it can get really intense at that point. Um, and like you said, most companies aren't going to get to that level. They don't really have to worry about that as much, but they do make mistakes. We all make some mistakes at some point in the future or early on. What are some of those common mistakes that you see entrepreneurs making over and over and over again, that if they just had that little angel on their shoulder saying, do this, would be all right? We already talked a little bit about, put it in writing, but what specifically maybe, or what is it that we're missing to kind of avoid some of the major pitfalls that we can come across?
So the most common business entity form in Michigan, and in fact in most states, is a limited liability company, right? And the document that governs how the members, which is what the interest ownership owners are called, is called an operating agreement. Uh, so single member LLCs don't really need an operating agreement, and technically no Michigan LLC, for example, or New York LLC actually needs one. But they govern really important things, like what do you do if there are two members and they disagree? What happens if one of the members gets divorced and his or her interest in the company is community property? What if one of them dies or becomes disabled? What if there is, a third party offer for part of your company? I mean, there are just all sorts of things that should be governed, and so many people, it's like people, hey, I've known these people for my entire life, or this is my spouse. I don't need to put all this down. We're going to agree. No, you're not. And what happens to the company when you don't, right? Because all the assets should belong in the company, right? Everything from intellectual property to actual physical assets. What happens when you split up? My students had a very interesting case once where a husband and wife started a business, and it looked like it was really going to take off. They were filling a need right below sort of, tier 3 auto suppliers. It was a wonderful idea. I don't know why no one had thought of it before. People have thought of it since, but they were getting ready to execute it. They had just gotten my minority business enterprise certification. They were going to be, and then the wife walked in on the husband watching gay porn.
Oh,
And yeah. Um, and so that caused a bit of a brouhaha. And but he promised it would never happen again. And she's explaining this to my students at the like middle of the semester. And then end of the semester come, toward the end of the semester, she caught him doing it again. And so they're trying to file. The company just went
Done.
right, and it was just done because they couldn't agree how to divide the assets or how to have one of them buy the other out, how to keep it going as a continuing entity. I mean, they just couldn't. They were unable to reach an agreement, and in the end, the whole thing was just liquidated. All right, now that's kind of a very stark, extreme example, but something similar happens all the time. No matter who you're in business with, if you have a company, go through all the formalities. Otherwise, you will regret it.
Yeah, and I mean, we see it all the time. It doesn't necessarily even have to be a company. You see it in relationships all the time. That's just a classic example of two people who are compatible at one moment in time and then incompatible in another moment in time. And unless you have things in writing, in prenups, for example, postnuptials, for example, it can get ugly really fast. Same thing
Real
happens in a
fast.
business. It's going to get ugly. And especially if you're successful, it gets even uglier when things do split up. When everybody's
Yeah.
broke and you're going to split up, it ain't no big deal. Everybody takes a little bit of the
Right.
negative and they go off in their own
And
way.
go off.
But when
Right.
there's money involved, all of a sudden things get crazy. Speaking of money, I think another big issue that small businesses have and struggle with, you mentioned an LLC as a completely different entity, and this relates to it, is commingling funds and not keeping things separate. Can you talk a little bit about why that's so important to avoid, especially when it comes to running and operating a business that is behind a veil?
Right. Exactly. And so the danger that you're referring to is actually called piercing the corporate veil, and it doesn't just apply to corporations. So the idea is that when you set up a formal business entity, right, you are essentially creating something that, in most respects, is separate from you. Right. There is you, and then there is the business entity. If you're a single member LLC, for tax purposes, sometimes it's a little different, but generally speaking, the business entity is here and you are here. And if the business entity does something wrong or there's some liability that goes, with the business entity, that's what bankruptcy is for sometimes. You go, well, that didn't work, and you go on your merry way. It's why Trump has been able to, for example, have a lot of his businesses declared bankrupt, but he has personally never been bankrupt. It's a very different thing. If you are commingling your assets, right, then you're no longer you're no longer worthy of being treated as two distinct entities, which means if there's liability there, whether it's from contract debt or whether it's liability for crashing a car, your business van into a house or whatever, suddenly it's not confined to the business entity. What they do is it's called piercing the corporate veil. They look behind it, and sometimes they can say you're a mere alter ego, right? You're just an excuse, maybe for tax reasons or to avoid liability, but you're really the same thing, and you never ever ever want that to happen, right? Which is why you need to have separate bank accounts. You need to have, when you sign things, you sign them, for you're signing for so and so and put your position. I've actually seen cases, where I've literally been in the courtroom waiting for my turn, where a case was thrown out because uh, it was a contract case, and the debtor was like, "Hey, I didn't sign this. I signed this for my company." And there was there was a personal guarantee in it that he had crossed out. It was actually related to a purchase for paint. And the court said, well, he crossed out this personal guarantee. So the only people you can go after are the company. The company is bankrupt and has no assets, and you didn't even name them as a party. So suit dismissed. You have to maintain that separation. Plus, it will make your accountant happy and make sure
Oh,
you have one.
and the IRS and the state that you're filing in. You have to
Yeah.
completely keep it separate. Yeah, no, that's one of the scariest things. And I made that mistake early on, personally guaranteeing things, not understanding what that was. And it does come back to bite you in the butt, ladies and gentlemen. At least he got that case thrown out, smart enough to cross out the personal
Right.
guarantee. Uh, I wasn't. I was in my early 20s, and I didn't know anything about anything. So, lesson learned. And if you're listening to this for the first time, take that one to heart, because it will come back to bite you if you don't do that. All right, Eric. There are many different attorneys that are doing different things, and I always like to ask that differentiation question. What is it that you feel you do best, that you offer your clients that nobody else really does, or that you do it in a unique way?
So my work is purely transactional. If I end up in court, it's because someone somewhere has done something very wrong. But what I really focus on is intellectual property. So I do what I call an IP audit. And I go and I look at intellectual property that the company has. And this doesn't just include intellectual property that they're creating, right, or that they rely on. It includes looking at intellectual property that they use in doing their business and making sure that they're not infringing on anyone else's copyright or trademark, making sure that if they have a license that they have it set up so that they know when it's going to be renewed, making sure that if they're using third parties for whatever service, that those third parties aren't infringing on someone else's intellectual property. This is becoming an increasingly prominent issue as artificial intelligence plays a larger role in businesses, right? So it's gotten to the point now where you have large language models that make sort of AI generated content available to non-enterprise type businesses, the kind of businesses that are operating, with 50, 100 employees, even smaller, and suddenly they're they're incorporating content that may be copyrighted somewhere else into what they're doing, right? So I and then you have to look at things like, oh, am I capturing all the IP that my business is creating, whether it's created by independent contractors, whether it's created by employees? Am I making sure that that intellectual property I own is being protected, whether it's through NDAs or through internal controls to maintain, sort of proprietary things that are subject to trade secret, but because they may not be copyrightable or patentable. So I help companies take a really holistic view of what constitutes intellectual property and make sure that not only are they protecting and monetizing what they have, but that they're not opening themselves up to liability for misusing intellectual property that really isn't theirs.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, most of these companies that you start to build up, that's where the value really lies, because you can use that intellectual property and generate revenue consistently over time. It's the thing that's going to stay in the corporation. It's the thing that gives value when you go to sell that corporation, if that's
Right.
what you choose to do later on, later down the road. And to have it locked in place is important. Even more so to have somebody like yourself come in and say, by the way, that thing you're doing, you should have some IP on that. And you're like, wait,
Right.
what? I didn't even
Exactly.
know that even existed, right? That's really some of the most important things of getting that professional opinion. Because again, if you're an entrepreneur, you are doing the thing that you know how to do well. Everything else you don't understand, you don't know. And this is why you need that additional help to come in and have that 10,000-foot overview look at your business and give you that advice that you're looking for. Where do you see
Exactly.
your practice going from here? I mean, you mentioned AI. I know there's a lot of different AI softwares that kind of threaten some of the legal aspects, especially creating contracts and things like that. Where do you see your company going with the emergence of AI, both on the using it as a tool and then using it as that thing stole your material. Let's get on that one.
Right. Exactly. So, um, AI it's really interesting. For example, in the copyright context, we really don't have any the laws on what is acceptable as far as AI content and what the extent to which it's copyrightable is really undeveloped. We have a number of opinions issued by the United States Patent and Trademark Office, but they really aren't, sort of laws or cases. And they say things like, um, a de minimis amount of AI generated material is acceptable in a copyright application. But how much is too much. So a lot of these things are still yet to be resolved. So my business is evolving in a way that focuses on helping people navigate what are very sort of choppy, previously unnavigated waters. And when you talk about, for example, AI being able to create content, right? It actually goes beyond that. AI is also able to search the internet to find infringing content. So that's a double-edged sword. And I don't think this is going to be settled really anytime soon, because the technology, keeps evolving. I don't think it actually poses a risk to attorneys who really give who really have an understanding of, for example, their client's subject matter. This is the example I always use. AI creations are like it's like watching a master Lego builder, show you his masterpiece, but he doesn't want you to notice that all his Legos were stolen, right? And that's basically what AI does. It doesn't so much create, at least in most instances. What it does is select, disassemble, and reassemble, right? And so that isn't really how a good attorney works. There's so many soft skills involved, understanding people. When I work with a client, one of the most rewarding things is talking to them and telling them, okay, this is what we're going to do next, right? You messed up, but don't worry, I got you. And the look on their face when they're like, oh man,
Thank you.
right? Like, okay, that's great. It's like, I'm like, hey, we can fix this. And the look on their face is sort of like the best part about my job. AI can't replicate that, so I'm not worried about them taking my job. I am very much interested in seeing how they impact the businesses of my clients, but I'm not worried about them taking my job.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, and you're right. You're right. There's always the subtleties, especially when you're in a service-based business, that makes you who you are, right? There's a reason why people come to you. They want to talk to you. And again, for me, it's always the aha moments. Like when they get it, they're like, oh yeah. For you, it's the relief, like, oh, okay, I can breathe again. Thank
Right.
you, giving me that freedom to breathe, to relax again. All right, Eric. Well, thank you very much for coming on the program today. If people want to reach out, they want to find out more about intellectual property, they want to find out more about what it is that you do or the help that you can offer, how can they do that?
Sure, you can go to my website, ewilliamsplc.com. There's a contact button there. I'm actually in the process of redoing my website, so it's still up for now. So they can go there. They can shoot me an email. Actually, I think my phone number is on there as well, and I'm always willing to, talk to people. It's hey, just reach out to me like you would your grandmother on Facebook or something. Though I'm not on Facebook.
It's the old school way. You pick up the phone, you say hello. That's how it works.
Right.
Man. That's how it works. have a conversation with somebody. It's life changing. I promise you. You don't have to send everything text and DM. But there is a website. So ewilliamsplc.com. Make sure you guys check it out. Eric, thank you for coming on the program today. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace. And we're out.
Love, peace, and hair grease.
It's over. Go home. Is your business in need of marketing? Try starting a podcast. But not just any podcast. Podcast like a pro. We can show you how to take your business from being invisible to becoming a brand people trust. Go to www.businessbros.com.